Hi everyone, so for today we're going to continue to practice writing equations of trig graphs, and this is going to be our final topic for this unit. So just a little bit before we start what the rest of this unit is going to look like, we are going to do a few days of review to really practice everything we've done in this unit, and then you guys will be taking a self-assessment. Just like last unit, the self-assessment is not counting as a grade. It's just an assignment for you guys to see how you are doing with this topic. So for today, you have 6 questions to do on Delta Math, and it is just like the 6 questions that you did yesterday. So if you're not sure about yesterday's assignment, the answer key is posted. You should be looking at your answer key and making corrections. If you're not sure about something, please make sure that you're emailing me so it will make this topic a little easier for you. So write the equation of a trig graph. For a lot of this unit, I really broke it down step by step, and I made you guys identify all of the important information. So amplitude, period, frequency, the shifts. When you get a question, it's not necessarily going to ask you all of those parts in the question, but you need to know that important information to be able to graph it. So even though it doesn't tell you to identify all of these things, I would highly suggest that you do take the time and find all of them to do it properly. So I can't draw on this graph, so I'm just going to make my own little graph over here. So the first thing I would suggest that you do is figure out if this is a sine or cosine curve. So my curve looks something like this. And for this graph, it's starting up here, and that is my maximum. So I know that this is a cosine curve. So our general equation for a cosine curve is y equals a cosine bx plus d. And let's just kind of talk about what all of these important features are. A is my amplitude, B is my frequency, and D is my shift, which really comes from my midline. So you need to be able to identify A, B, and D so that you can properly write this equation. So what I like to start with is I always like to start with where my midline of this graph is. So if you look at the graph, this graph has a midline at y equals 1. So that is going to be what my shift is, or what my D value is. It goes up 1 value. This also helps me with figuring out what my amplitude is. Your amplitude tells you how high and how low from that midline your graph is. So in this case, your amplitude is 1. So as you're starting to do this, I would write all of this information out. I would write A equals, B equals, and D equals. So I know my amplitude is 1. I know my shift up is 1. Oh, sorry, that is your D value, is 1. And now we need to find our B value. And I think the B value is the one that is a little more challenging, but we did do a lot of practice with this. To get your B value is your frequency, which comes from 2 pi over B, which is your period. So you need to trace what one cycle of this graph looks like. So this is my one cycle. And my one cycle, you're going to look at where it ends. So on this graph, on the Delta Math assignment, it has, after one cycle, it ends here at pi over 2. So you need to actually calculate what that B value is and set your equation of your period equal to the period. So 2 pi over B equals pi over 2. I'm going to cross multiply, so I have B pi equals 2 times 2 gives me 4, and we keep the pi there. And now I need to solve for that B value. So I'm going to divide by 4 and divide, solving for B. So my B's here, so I'm going to divide by pi and divide by pi. These cancel out, and I get that B is equal to 4. So now I could take all of this information and I could write my equation for this. So my B value is 4. I have my A, I have my B, and I have my D value. So let's write our equation. Y equals 1 cosine of 4x plus 1. Now, your amplitude, you can have a 1 there. You don't need a 1 there. I don't like to write the 1, but you can put the 1 if you want. So let me just talk about how we're going to put it in here. The first thing says it is an equation, which means if you don't put that y equals, they are going to tell you that it is incorrect. So please make sure you are doing that. I'm going to put my 1. Now I need to put cosine here. So to get cosine, I'm going to go to the button that says functions, and then cosine pops up. In parentheses, I'm going to hit back to get to my regular function. I'm going to put the 4x there. And then that shift actually needs to be outside of the parentheses. We don't tend to write the parentheses because you don't really need them. But the reason why there's no C here is sometimes there can be a shift left or right also. We're not doing that in this course for now. So just make sure you're going outside that parentheses and then putting the +1. And then you can submit your answer. And it says it is correct. So that is our equation of that cycle. So let's just look at another one. I want to do a few with you guys so that you feel confident. Again, if you're not writing it as y equals, it's going to tell you it's wrong. So please make sure that you're checking and that you're entering it in correctly. So again, same directions, write the trig equation for the graph. My first thing I would do is identify if it's a sine or a cosine. So look at your y-axis. It's crossing the y-axis in the middle of this graph. So it is a sine function. So y equals a sine of bx plus d. And if you want, you could even put this in parentheses because that's how it's going to ask you to type it in. Your job is to identify a, b, and d. So I like to find the d first. That's very easy to see where my midline is. And in this case, it is at -1. My a value, my amplitude, tells me how high and how low my graph goes. So on our graph, from that -1, I'm going to count how high it goes up. So it goes up 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes, and it also goes down from that -1, 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes. So my amplitude is 4. My b value is the one you need to do a little bit more work for. So we write an equation for our period, which is 2 pi over b. That's how I'm going to find my b value. And my period in this case, we have to see how long one cycle is. So if you trace your one cycle, I'm just going to sketch it out here. Starts here. Make this a little nicer. Your graph has a midline here at -1. So if I'm going to trace this one cycle, it goes up and it goes down, and it's going to stop back there at -1. So where it stops at -1, look at your x-axis, and that stops at pi. So I'm going to set this equal to pi. And if there is no denominator, we're going to change that denominator and just put it over 1. So pi over 1. Now we could cross multiply. b pi equals 2 pi. Again, I'm solving for b, so let's divide by pi. I get that b is equal to 2. So my b value here is 2. So now let's type in our equation. I have y equals, my amplitude is 4. I know that this is a sine equation, so again, I'm going to go to functions, I'm going to go to sine. I'm going to go back and hit 2x. And then you could arrow over with the arrows on the side. And I'm going to do -1. And for minus, you just do the subtraction sign and then 1. Submit your answer. And yes. Again, please make sure you put that y equals, otherwise it's not an equation. So let's try one more together. Write the equation for the graph. Let's look at it. First thing, identify if it's sine or cosine. It's crossing the y-axis, or it's starting at the middle of my graph, so I know that this is a sine function. So y equals a sine of bx plus d. You need to identify a, b, and d. So my shift, if I look at this graph, it did not shift up or down at all. So my d value is just 0. My amplitude, I see that this graph goes up 2 and down 2. So my amplitude is 2. And now to find my b value, we need to set up our equation. 2 pi over b, or your period, your length of one cycle in this graph, is 6 pi. I could put this over 1, and I could cross multiply. So I have 6 pi b equals 2 pi. I'm going to get b by itself, so I need to divide by 6 pi. So this cancels out completely. My pi's cancel out. And now I do need to simplify this. I get that b, and you put 2 over 6 in your calculator, is equal to 1/3. I have my a, b, and d values, so now I can write my equation. Now I just want to show you, if you don't put the y equals, it's going to tell me it's wrong. So I'm going to do it incorrectly because I do get 2 attempts on this. So I'm going to do 2 sine. Now to do a fraction, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do 1. And you can do divided, and it makes it your fraction, 3. Arrow over. And now I'm going to do x, arrow over again. And now I have plus 0. You don't need to put that, so I'm not going to put it, and I'm going to submit my answer. Are you sure? I'm going to say yes. Now it says incorrect. Try to find your mistake. You have 1 remaining attempt. Now I look at my work and I know that I did it right. So you need to know that that's what you did wrong. So I'm going to go back here again. It's asking for an equation. So I'm going to put that y equals, and I'm going to submit my answer. Now, if you got it wrong twice, and I'm going to show you, if you write something, let's see, I'm going to try one more, and I'm going to completely, let's say, do it wrong. Let's say I know my amplitude is 1. I'm going to say that is a sine function. I know that my period is 1, so I'm going to put a 1 in here. I'm going to put my x, and this is shifted up 1. I'm going to submit my answer. Let's say that's what I thought it was. I'm going to submit my answer. It's wrong. Let's say I look at it. I'm not sure what it is. You could submit your answer again. Now, what happens is what I really need you guys to do is make sure that you're looking at what is here. I know sometimes it looks very confusing, but this is everything that we've been doing this whole time. So your amplitude is 1. Maybe that was wrong. Now it says general form. Your general form looks a little different than how I call it, like your A and your B and C values. But your general form is the same. Your amplitude needs to go here. Your frequency, which we call our B value, goes next to your X, and your shift up goes there. Now, if you look at your solution and look at the values, you could see there's a few things that are different from it. So I think that this is the most important thing. You could also hit this I. Sometimes this gives you a little bit more information. Like this tells you your amplitude, your frequency, and your midline is what A, F, and C are. So that could really help you also. The one thing I want to show you is if you look at what the answer is and what your choice is, you could visually see what was wrong. So try to work back from there. All right, at this point, you guys can continue. I'm going to do one more with you if you would like to watch to see one more. Otherwise, you could just continue on your practice. Again, figure out what type of function this is. So y equals cosine. So A cosine of bx plus d. When I write this, I need to identify my A, my B, and my D. So my amplitude, I see this graph goes up 2 and down 2 from the middle. So my amplitude is 2, and my midline, look for the middle of your graph, is at -2. My B value I need to calculate, so 2 pi over B is equal to, trace one cycle of this graph, and one cycle ends at pi over 2. Again, I'm looking for my B value so I can now solve for this B value. I have B pi equals 4 pi. I'm solving for B, so I'm going to divide by that pi to cancel them out. Divide by pi here, and you get 4. B equals 4. So I'm going to submit my answer. Again, it's an equation, so please make sure it's y equals. My amplitude is 4. Nope, sorry, my amplitude is 2. Then cosine. My B value is 4. That goes with my X. And just arrow over to do your shift. And this is going down 2. You could submit your answer. So your job is to do do 6 of these questions. And if you have questions, if you're not sure where the B value is coming from, where your amplitude is coming from, if If you're not sure, there are videos on every one of these. So go back to the videos. If you weren't sure about amplitude, go back to the videos on amplitude. Go back to the videos on frequency. We spent days on finding each one of these parts. And if you're still unsure, please make sure you're messaging me and asking me questions. All right, guys, have a good one. Bye.